In this video talk about Avatar: The Way of Water, Avengers Endgame, and Titanic, box office collection every country. Let's start. Movie name: Avatar: The Way of Water, Avengers Endgame. Titanic. Budget: Avatar 2, $350 million. Avengers Endgame, $356 million. Titanic, $200 million. Director: Avatar 2, James Cameron. Avengers Endgame, Russo brothers. Titanic, James Cameron. Released date: Avatar 2, 16th December 2022. Avengers Endgame, 26th April 2019. Titanic, 19th December 1997. Running time: Avatar 2, 3 hours 12 minutes. Avengers Endgame, 3 hours 1 minute. Titanic, 3 hours 14 minutes. IMDb rate: Avatar 2, 7.8 out of 10. Avengers Endgame, 8.4 out of 10. Titanic, 7.9 out of 10. Box office collection country-wise: USA, Avatar 2, $625.6 million. Avengers Endgame, $858.3 million. Titanic, $672.3 million. France, Avatar 2, $145 million. Avengers Endgame, $62.1 million. Titanic, $129.3 million. Germany, Avatar 2, $134.8 million. Avengers Endgame, $63.2 million. Titanic, $129.1 million. United Kingdom, Avatar 2, $89.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $115 million. Titanic, $114 million. Spain, Avatar 2, $51.1 million. Avengers Endgame, $32.6 million. Titanic, $44.2 million. Italy, Avatar 2, $47.2 million. Avengers Endgame, $34.1 million. Titanic, $67.9 million. Netherlands, Avatar 2, $28.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $15 million. Titanic, $27 million. Switzerland, Avatar 2, $20.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $8.7 million. Titanic, $19.4 million. Poland, Avatar 2, $18.4 million. Avengers Endgame, $10.5 million. Titanic, $14 million. Belgium, Avatar 2, $18 million. Avengers Endgame, $8.6 million. Titanic, $20.7 million. Austria, Avatar 2, $17 million. Avengers Endgame, $8.3 million. Titanic, $11.6 million. Denmark, Avatar 2, $16.7 million. Avengers Endgame, $10.2 million. Titanic, $13.3 million. Sweden, Avatar 2, $16.3 million. Avengers Endgame, $11.7 million. Titanic, $22 million. UAE, Avatar 2, $12.8 million. Avengers Endgame, $12.7 million. Titanic, $2.9 million. Czech Republic, Avatar 2, $12.2 million. Avengers Endgame, $6.6 million. Titanic, $3.1 million. Norway, Avatar 2, $10.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $8.1 million. Titanic, $11 million. Turkey, Avatar 2, $9.4 million. Avengers Endgame, $7.9 million. Titanic, $10.4 million. Romania, Avatar 2, $8 million. Avengers Endgame, $3.3 million. Titanic, $1.9 million. Portugal, Avatar 2, $7.8 million. Avengers Endgame, $4.2 million. Titanic, $5.8 million. Hungary, Avatar 2, $6 million. Avengers Endgame, $4.5 million. Titanic, $2.2 million. Finland, Avatar 2, $5.3 million. Avengers Endgame, $4.9 million. Titanic, $8.7 million. Ukraine, Avatar 2, $4.9 million. Avengers Endgame, $5.9 million. Titanic, $1 million. South Africa, Avatar 2, $4.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $0.7 million. Titanic, $1 million. Iceland, Avatar 2, $0.8 million. Avengers Endgame, $0.7 million. Titanic, $1 million. Mexico, Avatar 2, $55.1 million. Avengers Endgame, $77.5 million. Titanic, $27 million. Brazil, Avatar 2, $44.4 million. Avengers Endgame, $85.6 million. Titanic, $70.4 million. Argentina, Avatar 2, $15.9 million. Avengers Endgame, $17.7 million. Titanic, $23.2 million. Colombia, Avatar 2, $14.2 million. Avengers Endgame, $17.6 million. Titanic, $5.3 million. Chile, Avatar 2, $13 million. Avengers Endgame, $18.8 million. Titanic, $6.1 million. South Korea, Avatar 2, $105.6 million. Avengers Endgame, $105.4 million. Titanic, $17.2 million. Australia, Avatar 2, $62.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $59.1 million. Titanic, $38.8 million. India, Avatar 2, $58.8 million. Avengers Endgame, $62.7 million. Titanic, $12.7 million. Japan, Avatar 2, $31.6 million. Avengers Endgame, $55.3 million. Titanic, $201.3 million. Taiwan, Avatar 2, $23.9 million. Avengers Endgame, $29.3 million. Titanic, $24.6 million. Indonesia, Avatar 2, $20.5 million. Avengers Endgame, $34.7 million. Titanic, $2.9 million. Hong Kong, Avatar 2, $18.2 million. Avengers Endgame, $29.3 million. Titanic, $15.1 million. Thailand, Avatar 2, $16.3 million. Avengers Endgame, $27.2 million. Titanic, $4.7 million. Malaysia, Avatar 2, $12.2 million. Avengers Endgame, $21.1 million. Titanic, $2.7 million. New Zealand, Avatar 2, $12.1 million. Avengers Endgame, $9.5 million. Titanic, $7.6 million. Vietnam, Avatar 2, $11.7 million. Avengers Endgame, $11.7 million. Titanic, $0.98 million. Philippines, Avatar 2, $11.3 million. Avengers Endgame, $32.8 million. Titanic, $4.8 million. Singapore, Avatar 2, $8.6 million. Avengers Endgame, $14.3 million. Titanic, $4.1 million. China, Avatar 2, $242.4 million. Avengers Endgame, $632.1 million. Titanic, $145 million. Domestic collection, Avatar 2, $658.4 million. Avengers Endgame, $858.3 million. Titanic, $672.3 million. International collection, Avatar 2, $1.586 billion. Avengers Endgame, $1.941 billion. Titanic, $1.573 billion. Total collection worldwide, Avatar 2, $2.244 billion. Avengers Endgame, $2.799 billion. Titanic, $2.243 billion.